He's playing this president like a fiddle. And the longer he plays it...
I disagree with this playing with a fiddle analogy.
Senator Jean Shaheen tries to claim Trump is not smart, but Marco Rubio fires back hard.
We heard the conversation that the president had with Vladimir Putin, the phone conversation where Putin didn't agree to any meaningful negotiation that would end this war in Ukraine. As President Trump has admitted, Vladimir Putin is taking him for a ride. Now, we have a bipartisan bill in the Senate that's led by Lindsey Graham. It has 80 sponsors. I understand that the House members are ready to take this up on a discharge petition if we pass it out of the Senate. How much longer until we rein Putin in? And are you prepared to support that sanctions bill that Graham and Blumenthal and 78 other members of the Senate support?
Well, let me answer your last question first, and that is about the bill. We obviously can't control what Congress does, and we've told the Russians this. Not now, 6-8 weeks ago. I believe, Senator Shaheen, you were involved in a conversation that made it clear to the Russians what would happen if there was no progress made. And that's been repeated multiple times. I would also make this point, and it's important. Every single sanction, not one sanction has been lifted on the Russians. Every single sanction that was in place under the previous administration remains in place. So this idea we've given up leverage, well, we have the same leverage today we had under the previous administration.
Well, Mr. Secretary, I would argue that the leverage that we've given up is taking NATO membership off the table, taking away a commitment to continue to help the Ukrainians with intelligence sharing and with military equipment and arms that they need to help fight this war.
Well, that continues. There was a pause for 1 week. All of that was restarted.
That was intelligence sharing, though, but it doesn't cover the equipment and arms.
Oh, absolutely. That program has not been rescinded. They continue to receive armaments from the United States.
And we continue to fund what the Ukrainians need as the president. And are you prepared to pass another supplemental bill to support them?
Well, that's a different decision. That's a different question. That's not up for me to decide. The White House would have to make a determination about whether to come to Congress for a supplemental. But everything that's been approved and congressionally appropriated is ongoing. In fact, to the extent that the Ukrainians have asked for anything additional, what they've asked for is air defenses, Patriot units, which frankly we don't have. But we are working closely with our NATO allies. There are NATO allies that do have some batteries of Patriot missiles that they could provide or transfer over to the Ukrainians to defend, for example, the airspace of Kyiv and other places. And we've been encouraging in that front and working alongside our partners there to get deliveries of some of these systems. As you can imagine, none of these countries want to give up their Patriot systems either. But we can't make them fast enough, and part of the challenge we have in Ukraine is that munitions are being expended substantially faster than the ability of the broader West, not just us, but the West, to produce them. Now, that said, on the issue of Ukraine, here's what we can all agree on. There is no military solution to this crisis.
Right.
It will have to end in a negotiated settlement. And the fundamental challenge we have in Ukraine is this. Russia wants what they do not currently have and are not entitled to, and Ukraine wants what they cannot regain militarily. And that's been the crux of the challenge.
I don't disagree with that at one level. But on the other hand, what Vladimir Putin is doing now is playing for time. And he's playing this president like a fiddle. And the longer he plays it, the more opportunity he has to gain territory in Ukraine, and the harder it's going to be to get him to the table. What we need to do is to put pressure on Vladimir Putin in every way we can to ensure that we can get them to the negotiating table.
Well, I disagree with this playing with a fiddle analogy, because the truth of the matter is when Vladimir Putin woke up this morning, he had the same set of sanctions on him that he's always had since the beginning of this conflict, and Ukraine was still getting armaments and shipments from us and from our allies, and the European Union is about to impose additional sanctions, and the U.S. is looking for no Patriot batteries to be able to transfer from other NATO nations into Ukrainian hands. And what the president's trying to do is end a war. He's trying to end a bloody, costly war that neither side can win, and people are dying every single day. And so, but this notion that what has Putin gained throughout this? He hasn't gotten a single concession. He hasn't gotten a single sanction lifted.
And the more time he gets without additional pressure on Russia, the more incentive he's got to continue to gain territory and continue to play for time. But I want to just get to a final question because my time is running out. And that is, I recently wrote a letter to you about the issuance of executive orders on thousands of Afghan allies. These are people who fought alongside our military during the war in Afghanistan. They've been stranded in Qatar and Albania and Pakistan and Afghanistan. These are individuals who have been vetted already. They're ready to travel to the United States. And the question I have is this administration going to allow them to come to the United States as it promised? Because unless we're willing to keep our commitments to those people who were willing to fight and die alongside of us, then how can we ever ask people to do that again?
Yeah, a couple points. Some of those are I think the issues that's getting mixed up here is whether we are going to pay for them to fly to the United States once a visa is issued, or whether they have to find their own transportation to the U.S. So there's two separate topics: our payment to move people forward, but also the issuance of the visas. And when that is still going through an internal review as to who is going to be allowed in, there's been a review of the vetting process that's been used. Frankly, there have been some errors found in the previous vetting process that we're concerned about, and I'm separating out from that audience people who we have closely vetted because we've been working alongside them for many years with regards to their service alongside our intelligence forces or special operators on the ground from the broader. Remember, they're also bringing dependents with them. And so there were some concerns early on about freezing or slowing down this program until we could determine whether we were properly vetting people to come towards the United States. And that process is ongoing, and I think we'll have more concrete answers for you, which I know is not satisfactory at this moment, but we've obviously had a lot going on. But this is something that we've heard a lot from both our DoD partners and others in the intelligence community, and we're working to make progress on that.
I'm out of time, but just to clarify, on last week, Secretary Noem announced that temporary protected status, which I understand is not exactly the same, but for over 8,000 Afghans would end on July 12th. Many of those people are people, again, who fought and died alongside of our men and women in the military. And for us to send them back to sure death at the hands of the Taliban is just not what they were promised when they agreed to fight with us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Senator Ricketts.
If you watched that exchange closely, you saw two completely different worldviews collide in real time. Senator Jean Shaheen came into that hearing pushing the same argument we've heard from establishment politicians for years. More pressure, more escalation, more involvement, more spending, and eventually somehow Vladimir Putin will fold. But Marco Rubio pushed back with something a lot of Americans have been asking from the very beginning of this conflict. What exactly is the endgame here? Rubio made a point that completely undercut the media narrative surrounding President Donald Trump in Ukraine. Democrats and the corporate press keep claiming Trump is soft on Russia or somehow giving Putin everything he wants, but Rubio pointed out something undeniable. Every sanction that existed before is still in place. Russia hasn't got relief. Ukraine is still receiving weapons. Intelligence sharing resumed. NATO is still involved. So where exactly is this massive concession everyone keeps talking about? That's what made Shaheen's frustration so revealing. She wasn't arguing that sanctions were lifted because they were. She wasn't arguing Ukraine had been abandoned because Rubio explained that weapons and support were still flowing. What she was really arguing is that the administration isn't escalating fast enough for her liking. And that's the real divide in Washington right now. Rubio also said something else that a lot of politicians refuse to admit publicly because it's politically inconvenient. He acknowledged there is no military solution to this war. That's a huge statement. For years, Americans have been told that if we just send more money, more missiles, more tanks, more aid packages, then somehow total victory is around the corner. But reality has caught up with the rhetoric. Russia still controls territory. Ukraine continues suffering devastating losses. Europe is burning through stockpiles. Even Rubio admitted Western production cannot keep up with the pace of munitions being consumed. That part matters because it exposes how disconnected many people in Washington are from the actual strategic reality. It's easy for politicians sitting comfortably in D.C. to demand endless escalation. It's much harder to explain how long American taxpayers are supposed to fund an open-ended proxy war with no clear victory condition. And Rubio's comments about Patriot missile systems were especially important. He basically admitted the United States doesn't even have enough systems available to hand over freely. That's not a small detail. America's military stockpiles are not infinite. Our defense industrial base has limits, yet the people constantly demanding escalation almost never talk about those limits. They act like America can endlessly supply the world without consequences at home. What you're seeing now is growing tension even inside the Republican Party over how involved the United States should remain. Some Republicans still favor a more traditional interventionist approach, while others aligned more closely with Trump are asking tougher questions about accountability spending and whether prolonging the conflict actually saves lives or simply drags out the suffering. And Rubio threaded that needle carefully here. He didn't abandon Ukraine. He didn't defend Putin. Instead, he framed the issue around realism. He basically said both sides want outcomes they cannot fully achieve militarily. Russia wants more territory than it currently controls. Ukraine wants territory back that it likely cannot retake through force alone. That's a brutal reality, but it's one many leaders have avoided saying publicly because it clashes with the emotional messaging people have been fed for years. Shaheen's playing Trump like a fiddle line was clearly designed to generate headlines, but Rubio countered it effectively by asking a simple question. What exactly has Putin gained from Trump's approach so far? No sanctions lifted, no NATO withdrawal, continued military aid to Ukraine, continued European pressure. Rubio's argument was essentially that Trump's team is trying to negotiate an end to the war while maintaining leverage, not surrendering leverage. And honestly, this exchange also showed why voters are so exhausted with Washington foreign policy debates. Too many politicians talk as if there are only two options, either endless escalation or complete surrender. Rubio was arguing for something in between, continued pressure combined with eventual negotiations, because at some point diplomacy becomes unavoidable whether politicians want to admit it or not. The Afghanistan point at the end also shouldn't be ignored. Shaheen pivoted to Afghan allies stranded overseas after the disastrous withdrawal under President Joe Biden, and that served as a reminder of why so many Americans are skeptical whenever Washington promises another long-term foreign commitment. People remember what happened in Afghanistan. They remember the chaos, the trillions spent, and the lack of accountability afterward. That history hangs over every Ukraine debate now, whether politicians admit it or not. At the end of the day, this hearing wasn't really about one sanctions bill. It was about a bigger question facing America right now. Does the United States continue down the path of open-ended global conflicts with no defined endpoint, or does it start pushing harder for negotiated outcomes even when those outcomes are imperfect? That's the debate you just watched unfold. And it's only going to get more intense as this war drags on. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below. Do you agree with Rubio that this war can only end through negotiation, or do you think Washington should increase pressure even further on Russia? Let me know what you think.